If you clicked on this video, you're probably wondering, damn bruh, hasn't it been like 6 months since you released the shop system? Yes, it has been 6 months, and over the course of the 6 months, I've gotten a lot of requests for features and little changes I could make to the shop system, and just kind of like an update in general. And I will say, I am surprised how many people actually got this system, like our first ever system. So I will say thank you for the engagement. It is super appreciated and kind of pushed me to keep doing this video. So as requests, the main ones I've gotten were multiple currency compatibility, so the ability to have multiple currencies, text formatting, so decimals, and also shorteners, which you see a lot in Fortnite maps today, so like a K, the thousands, and everything. And this one wasn't a request, but it was something that I wanted to do out of complete frustration and spite for the Fortnite UEFN system. It's easy widget integration in my shop system. So here's a little overview. So the pipeline. So how it goes is that the shop manager holds the shops. When there's a transaction, the shop will ask the currency manager, can I afford this? The currency manager will then check the stats, run the numbers, and decide, can I afford this? Yes or no? If it's a yes, the shop will grant the item and ask the currency managers to spend the currency. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So now I'll go over every part one by one. So first I'll go over the shop manager. The main purpose of the shop manager is simply to hold and manage the shops. You can have as many shop managers as you want, and there will be no conflict in the project. For example, if you want to have different categories of shops and you don't want to have an absolute mess in the managed shops, I often do this in my maps where I use the shop manager. For example, I'll have a shop for the weapons, I'll have a shop for the cosmetics, and I'll have a shop for anything else. So there's mostly for organization. Uses, like example uses of the shop manager. It's called the shop manager, but really what it is a transaction manager. So anything that requires a currency and a check can use the shop manager, even if it isn't the shop. So for example, you have a lock. So a door that needs a lock, and you want to have your key as a currency, well, you can use a shop manager to, let's say, activate the trigger that opens the door by spending the key. It's a goofy example, but it could be a use of the shop manager. The shop manager needs 3 main parts, like that are obligated. Last time I had game manager is optional, but this time I'm not going to. Most games should have a game manager, and if you don't have a game manager, I just highly recommend looking into it. Having something that handles player spawns and can just be integrated, it can be integrated super easily, and it's just really useful in terms of keeping things organized. I will provide a game manager within the project, but all that's needed is the onSpawn function, which if you are savvy in Verse, you can go and extract it. Then you have the currency manager. The currency manager, like I explained before, is basically just the link between the player stats and the shops. And then finally, you have your shops. Obviously, the shop manager does nothing without the shops. So first, I'll show you how to set up the shop manager. So what I mean by a shop is basically just this collection of parameters. So a shop has a few parameters that are kind of key to its functioning. So obviously you have the shop ID, the price, which is a list of costs, which is an amount of a specific currency type. I'll explain this later. A save slot for if you want an item to be saved using the player stats manager, some settings, which I'll explain very soon, and the triggers. So first I'll explain the shop ID. The shop ID, it is very important that every shop has a different ID, even across multiple shop managers. It doesn't really matter what the ID is, it just matters that it's different. So this could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 116, 117, it really doesn't matter. Essentially why it's important that they are not the same is because my shop system uses the ID to check if a shop is saved or not. So really the shop ID, unless nothing in your game is saved, which is fine, I would recommend just always having a different ID for every shop. But it is not necessary if your shops aren't saved in the player stat systems, which I'll explain very soon. So next is the price. The price, a bit of an overhaul. Before it used to just be an amount, now it is a collection of amounts out of a specific currency type. So I can add as many costs as I want, and since currency types are stored in an array, the first currency type is going to be 0, and there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So let's say I want this shop to cost, I'll do 100 of currency type 0, which for me is dollars. Then you'll have your save slot, which becomes relevant when I explain these settings. So I'll kind of explain them at the same time. Spends currency is something that you most of the time want turned on, but basically this allows you to make more of a currency check. So the best use case that I found for this, or the use case where it's necessary, is, for example, you have rank rewards. Rank can be a currency, and if you have a shop that checks for ranks, you could have a shop that doesn't spend rank, but that still checks if the player has the necessary funds to make the purchase. Then you have these two. They're very different, but the explanation is going to be pretty similar. You have if the shop is unlockable. If the shop is unlockable, they will only need to spend the currency on the first purchase of the shop. Then you have save equip. Save equip is used for re-granting the item when the player respawns or comes back. This is where the save slot becomes relevant. You can have multiple save slots and you can add them just like the player currencies. You can add as many as you want. If two items are put in the same save slot and they are save equipped, they will overwrite each other. So let's say I have a cosmetic hat and I want it to be re-equipped every time the player comes back. I would equip it in the safe slot, let's say 0. And then if I buy another hat, I don't want the previous hat to be equipped. I want this new hat to be equipped. I'm going to keep it in the safe slot 0. So it's going to overwrite the safe slot. Then for the triggers, these are the most important parts. You have two triggers, the grant trigger and the transaction trigger. The grant trigger is the trigger that's going to be connected to the device that grants what your shop is about. So this could be anything, and this doesn't have to be like a Fortnite device. But in the examples that I'm going to give, this is going to be a cosmetic, and this is going to be a weapon. The transaction trigger is the trigger that is connected to the way the player buys the item. So in my case, it's going to be buttons, but in your case, it could be UI buttons. It could be anything, really. So you just have to connect it to the transaction trigger. The transaction trigger checks if the player is able to make the purchase. If the player is able to make the purchase, the transaction trigger will automatically trigger the grant trigger. But these two are not directly connected. The grant trigger can be triggered by other things, and the transaction trigger doesn't need to always grant the item. And finally, you have the maybe forget shop trigger. I put this as maybe forget shop trigger because maybe you don't want the player to be able to forget the shop. But this is used if you have an unlockable shop. It'll be useful for you to be able to make a player forget a shop. So this can be useful if, let's say, you want to make like a perk tree system where you want a player to be able to reset their perks. Let's say in a roguelike, you could have specific shops that are tied to your upgrades that you want to forget. Holy smokes, that was definitely a mouthful. I hope I didn't lose y'all. Make sure to rewatch as many times as you need. It can be a bit complicated, but in actual execution, it's super simple. Once you understand, it's smooth as butter. Then I'll explain the currency manager. So the currency manager needs only two things. It needs the game manager and the HUD manager. It doesn't really need the HUD manager. The HUD manager is mostly for updating the UI. For my example, you'll see I have my currency UI that needs to be updated based on the purchases. So the currency manager is going to handle that because it's the currency manager. It's not going to be tied to the shops. The game manager is really just to set up the currency UI. Other than that, if you're not using any UIs for your currencies, so let's say like you want to handle stuff differently, you don't need to put the game manager or the HUD manager in the settings. You can just have the currency manager just hanging out. I also have a bunch of like purchase complete HUD, purchase impossible HUD, purchase already complete HUD. I'm going to include Like, I'll include them in the map, but honestly, you probably don't need them. Or you could probably do something more clever with that. And finally, I didn't talk about this one, but the reward manager, this is included in the package because what if you want to get money? So this works with the cost system. So the reward manager is the way your player gets their currencies. And I'm using triggers here because maybe you want to reuse the reward multiple times. So let's say I have this coin and I want to have 100 of them. They can all be tied to the same trigger that grants 100 gold. So that's a cool way that you could do to kind of organize your stuff. And let's say you want to quickly change the value of a coin. You can do directly here in the reward manager, put it to 200. There you go, boom. Now every coin is worth 200 instead of 100. But I'm going to keep it at 100 for the example. And over here you see the currency type. So right now I have 2 rewards. One that grants stars. Yes, imagine this is a star. I couldn't find any. Maybe if I do this. Is this believable as a star? I'll say this is believable as a star. But, so you have the star and you have the coin, which the star will be my second currency. So it says currency type 1, but it's with arrays. So it starts with 0, then the second currency is 1, then the third currency is 2. You get the idea. But this will basically reward us with the stuff that we need. And also quickly, I'll show you how the UIs work. So this HUD manager, I'll make a quick video about it because it can get pretty technical to make new UIs. Well, when I mean pretty technical, I mean write 4 lines of code in verse. But the idea is that when you want to create a new UI, so here I've reset the managed UIs, you're going to create a managed UI. So just like the other systems, you can have as many HUD managers as you want. So let's say you want different HUD managers for different like UI states. So for example, you want like a main menu UI, then you want a shop UI, and then you want a play UI. You can all have these on different HUD managers. And as long as you know what you're doing, it could be pretty simple. So essentially here, I've managed to reset UIs, and I'll take you through how to make your currency UI. So by default, it gives you a HUD element, which can be useful if you want to just make a default UI. But I'm going to use the currency HUD element, which will be provided with the shop. So I've exposed a few parameters. The first one is going to be your UI texture. So you can set this to anything, but I'm going to set it to $1. Then you set your currency type. So the dollar for me is currency 0. Then you have these 2 little settings. So use shorthand is a fun little setting that was requested that will allow you to shorten big numbers. So for example, you have $1,000, it will show 1.00k, which is pretty cool. I'm going to turn this on so I can showcase it. And then you have show decimals. So for example, you want to make a more realistic game. If you want to have a game where you have currencies in the cents, you could have $1.25, and show decimal will allow you to show the 0.25. Otherwise, it will only show 1. And here you can give your UI a little title. This doesn't do anything, but this is useful for organization, so I'm going to call this currency 1 UI. Here's the fun parameters I was talking about earlier, which allow you to change and adjust your UIs directly in the editor, which is absolutely awesome when you don't want to have to go into the widget and every single time have to readjust and push. Fortnite have made it much faster to push, but it is still a hassle in 2026, guys. Come on. We don't need to push every little thing. Just make it simple. We really need UEFN to make verse and UI integration better, because boy, let me tell you, it has been a nightmare making this work. I'm really happy with what I've landed on, but I really hope this becomes obsolete. And I say this with 100% honesty. I hope I've wasted my time here, because if UEFN can provide us with something that's better, I will cry tears of joy. But anyways, so I've set up a little showcase to show you the shops in action. You'll see it's pretty quick. So over here I have these currencies tied to the reward triggers. So when I collect them, bling blong, I have dollar and star. I love dollar, I love star. Then with the dollars and star, I can come to the shops and buy. So let's say this one gives me a shotgun. You see it costs me 100. And if I drop the shotgun, since I made this shop unlockable, I can purchase again and no currency was spent. Then over here I have my star shop, which will give me a little cosmetic. Awesome sauce. And over here we have the combined cost ones. So if I buy this, it will grant me a sniper. Pretty nice. And here to showcase you how the combined cost works. If I only grab 1 star and I come here, well, it would have helped if I didn't make the shop unlockable. But essentially, I wouldn't have been able to buy this. So now for the shops that are set to save equip, when I respawn, ouch, it will automatically re-equip the cosmetic and the sniper, which was in the same save equip slot as the shotgun, but I can still come back to the shotgun and re-obtain it. So I hope you like the little update I've made to the shop system, and obviously this will be free for the people who've already bought it. We're not going to touch the price, so you can benefit from all of this for the same price as the previous shop system. The HUD system will receive its own video a bit later on to add stuff to it, but the more code savvies out there will be able, by just checking how I created the currency HUD, will be able to make their own HUDs without any issues. So thank you for watching. I hope you like my system and have a damn great day.